Good morning. I'm so excited to be here. Tall's gone, which means that this morning I am the teacher for the Defense Against Dark Arts, which I'm pretty sure makes me, just as Dwight would say on The Office, the assistant professor of positive psychology instead of merely the assistant to the professor of positive psychology. Many of you know me as Head TF Sean or just Sean or the I am czar of Kirkland House or Mr. Positivity or the guy who looks like a chiseled Roman god of war. But what many of you may not know is that I have a softer side too. When I was little, I broke my sister's arm in 3 different places. We were playing war, and we were running around the living room jumping over cushions, as soldiers do. And at one point in this conflict, as my report, which I filed with my parents later on, clearly indicated, that I saw Cobra Commander take a snipe shot at my sister. With absolutely no regard for my own safety, I reversed direction, dove head first into my sister, pushing her out of the way of the oncoming and invisible bullet and into a brick wall. When my dad came into the room, I was standing above her saying, "I'm a hero, I saved her." Now, does this make me a hero? No. No, this doesn't make me. You know who the real heroes are? The real heroes are the people that wake up every day, put on their ordinary clothes, go into their ordinary job, get a distress call from the mayor, put on their costume, and go and fight crime. Those are the real heroes. You know who's a hero? Hero from Heroes. Do you know what this is from? The Office. Good. We have one person that watches comedy. Good. Thank you. I tell you this story because later that afternoon, my sister and I were, after we went to the emergency room, we were playing on top of my bunk bed, and we were playing war. We were slow learners. And this time it was my G.I. Joe against her My Little Ponies. And in the midst of this reenacting of this geopolitical conflict, my sister got really excited and leaned too far back on the bed. As a result, she suddenly disappeared off the back of the top of the bunk bed. I looked over the side of the bunk bed going, "Not today." And I saw my sister there lying on the floor with her, she landed painfully on her hands and knees on the floor. And I saw this wail of suffering and pain and injustice about to erupt out of my sister's mouth. Now, my parents had charged me with playing safely and as quietly as possible with my sister, seeing as how I'd just broken her arm. And who are they going to blame if something happens to my sister again later on in the day than the child that they loved most, the one who wanted to grow up to be a Ghostbuster, the one who also broke her arm? Me. So I did the only thing my little frantic 7-year-old brain could think to do, and I said, Amy, wait, did you see how you landed? No human lands like that. You're a unicorn. Now, this was absolutely cheating, for I knew that there was nothing in the world my sister wanted more than for the rest of the world to realize that she was, in fact, a unicorn. And you could see on my sister's face this conflict as her brain attempted to devote resources to contemplating her pain and suffering and injustice as she had fallen off the bed with a broken arm. Or on the other side, devoting resources to viewing the world and contemplating her newfound identity as a unicorn. And the latter won out, and a smile spread across my sister's face. She laughed, and she scrambled back up onto the bunk bed with all the grace of a baby unicorn. Now, what we realized at this tender age of just 7 and 5 years old was something that was going to be at the heart, at the vanguard of the positive psychology revolution that we've been talking about how our brain is basically a single processor capable of consciously choosing to devote resources either to the pain and suffering on one side or viewing the world through the lens of something like optimism or mindfulness. So too, I think humor is exactly in this facet. I think that humor itself is the option, the mindful option of choosing between viewing the world through the lens of suffering, of optimism, suffering, of pain and injustice, or viewing the world through the lens of something that's adaptive and powerful. So today, I actually bought a new one of these because the other one didn't work because I didn't turn on the power. So I defined humor today as a mindful lens through which we can view the world. It's a way of mindfully perceiving the world, analogous to optimism, where an individual heightens awareness of potentials within a situation. Today we're going to talk about a lot of different definitions of happiness and different ways that we conceive of it and the effects upon all of us. But before we do so, I want to talk a little bit about why we're doing this in the first place. First of all, Saul knew that he was going to be away today. He told me repeatedly in March that there was no way he was going to be able to teach during the Tuesday after 420, which I just assume he meant because of Passover. And so I agreed to give the talk on humor because it seemed to slip through the proverbial cracks of the assigned readings and syllabus for this course. If you were unaware that there were assigned readings or a syllabus for this course, you talk to me after class. So I'm sure that Tal was sad to not be here this week and last weekend because he missed getting to see the Wu-Tang Clan and Gavin DeGraw reunited at last. Did you guys see the Crimson article from yesterday that that described how one of the members of the Wu-Tang Clan, an unidentified member of the Wu-Tang Clan, held out his microphone at one point during the concert for the rest of the audience gesturing for them to do the lyrics, finish the lyrics for him. And when he was met with stony and stone silence, he responded, "Well, I guess you guys aren't as smart as you thought you were. You know you've hit rock bottom when an unidentifiable member of the Wu-Tang Clan is making fun of you." So I'm excited about being here today for several reasons. First of all, I think that humor is one of the most important parts of the positive psychology we'll be talking about because it matters at every single level of the things that we describe. If you know me, you know that I went here as an undergraduate. I studied English and religion, went to the divinity school and studied Christian and Buddhist ethics. And now I'm studying psychology and running a positive psychology consulting firm out of Kirkland B23. And I'm also sort of the intramural tutor / living legend / national hero in Kirkland House. I'm very important. I have many leather-bound books, and my room smells of rich mahogany. It also looks a lot like a dorm. I tell you this because I'm running out of things to say. And this synthesis of religion and psychology and English and philosophy will all play an important part in today's lecture. So today, very quickly, the things we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the psychology of humor. We're going to talk about the mental and physical benefits of humor. We'll talk about the positive social benefits, pragmatic steps that you can take on your own, and the greatest power of humor, which is, I believe, the therapeutic value of humor, the ability to view the world in a completely different way by changing our cognitive mindsets. Now, many of you know that I'm responsible for writing much of the final. I'm also a very slow reader. This combination means the majority of the final will probably be on this lecture. So I'll definitely point out the parts of the lecture that you absolutely need to write down, and which surely must be your extremely copious notes from this morning. So let me tell you about, I know you're sitting there looking at my PowerPoint slides and thinking to yourself, I'm probably going to name my first 3 children Sean regardless of gender. And I wonder what it is that got Sean into psychology in the first place. Well, I'll tell you so you can concentrate, but it also serves as a case study for us today. I fell in love with psychology when I fell in love with my babysitters. All of my babysitters came from my dad's psychology class. He taught psychology at Baylor University, so all of my babysitters came from his classes, and I fell in love with all of them. And I realized at one point that the dating wasn't going as well as I'd hoped to. We were only dating whenever my parents paid for it. And so I decided to take matters into my own hand, and I decided that the only way that I could possibly date these girls was to be part of their world for a little bit. I took this advice from Ariel and the Little Mermaid. And so I decided to volunteer to be part of a psychology experiment in my dad's class. And he was really excited about having me there, so he invited me on the day when they were having the brainwave a brainwave machine in class where they're hooking people up to it. And I thought this would be an excellent way for me to impress these girls, because nothing says attractive like electrodes and a lube on your head and with all these wires hanging off. It's just as hot today as it was then. And so anyway, I was there and I was smiling because they were all smiling at me, and I thought things were going pretty well on our date so far, when all of a sudden my dad was so excited he forgot to do something very simple, and it was a rudimentary machine, because this was a while ago, and he forgot to ground the wire on the brainwave machine. And so the very first thing that happened to me was on our date was I got an electric shock, and I'm like, Dad, shut it off. Everyone burst into laughter, including all of my future toward love affairs with these women. And my dad was laughing so hard he was crying. He couldn't even help me. He was able to shut off the machine, but that's about it. And I guess he thought it was pretty funny. I guess cruel and unusual punishment is pretty funny. I guess maybe waterboarding next time, Dad. Thanks a lot. So I'd love to be part of your experiments again. So anyway, I was so embarrassed and so upset, I ripped off all of my electrodes one by one while everyone's laughing at me, and then stalked off to the side of the classroom. And right as I got to the door, fortunately, I turned back and said, Dad, thanks a lot for ruining my chances with all my girlfriends, and then slammed the door. And it's true, I never did get with any of those girls. So what just happened there? For the few of you that did laugh at that story, what was it that, it's weird, Sanders, the acoustics in this building are incredible. Like, you can't hear the laughter that's going on all the time. It's amazing. It's like the room's eating my laughter. So what just happened there? Well, I think that one of the things that's really interesting is we laugh at that story because it's couched not as a story of tragedy, but as a story of beloved child abuse. And we laugh because this is a moment in which we've been primed to laugh. We're surrounded by a group of people who we're probably laughing more because we're in a room full of people. Groups have a social effect upon us, right? So if you want to heighten the sensation, please feel free to hold hands with the person sitting next to you. But the interesting thing is when you laugh, laughter itself is so weird. Wikipedia defines humor as the rhythmic, vocalized, expiratory, and voluntary actions, which is also how it defines much of my dancing. But when you're laughing, and right now, 15 facial muscles in your body are going crazy, including your zygomatic major muscle, which is raising your lip. At the same time, this is pretty cool. I have no idea why this happens, but the epiglottis starts to cover over your larynx, which makes it constricting your breathing, which means you're basically suffocating, which is why you're having trouble catching your breath. You're welcome. Blood pressure is lowered, while at the same time somehow you have an increase in vascular blood flow, and you've flexed your abdominal, respiratory, facial, leg, and back muscles. This is the most workout I've ever had, ever. Now, this is amazing that this would happen. It's clear that humor and laughter has a visceral effect upon us. It clearly has a social effect. If you're in a good mood right now, chances are you're going to be laughing more. If you're in a bad mood right now, chances are you can't help but laugh at my jokes. So part of what's going on here is that the social environment, the room, the jokes themselves, your physical body are all manifesting changes because of this. The question is then, can we study humor just as we ask the question, can we study happiness? And what's the point of studying humor? Well, just as Paul mentioned that right now there's either 17-to-1 or 21-to-1 negative to positive ratio of research that's occurring in the scholarly journals. Last night when I was supposed to be writing this talk, I looked on e-resources and found that there was a 97-to-3 ratio of negative to humor research. For example, depression was 125,000 articles, while humor was only 4,943 articles. Nothing came up for Stephen Colbert. But the reason why that this is important is that because of something called the medical school syndrome. We know that the way that we study absolutely has effects upon our body. So if you know the medical school syndrome, you know that as doctors are learning about all the different diseases that are out there in the world, suddenly they realize they have all of them. And my brother-in-law called me from medical school and said, Sean, my brother-in-law's name is Bobo. That's another story. Bobo called me from medical school and said, Sean, I have leprosy. And I had no idea how to console him because he had just gotten over menopause. The way that we study the world around us actually changes the lens through which we view the world. And if we're not studying humor, we're missing out on one of the major aspects of our social interactions, but also the way the world works. So why don't we talk about humor more often? Well, first of all, humor is extremely difficult to find. Every time you attempt to define humor, it seems to slip through your fingers. Every time you everyone finds something else funny, right? What I wanted to show for videos today, you might not find funny at all, and what you find funny is objectively not funny at all. I tried to show my parents Superbad because I thought that that was funny, and if they were laughing on the inside, they certainly weren't showing it on the outside. Part of what we're doing, and you know, some people laugh at things that are supposed to be serious, like Gossip Girl, and then people in the Kirkland Grill have to throw pillows at them and threaten the ad board to ad board them just so I don't miss anything. So, why talk about it? So, part of it is the definitional problems. It's so difficult for us to actually define what humor is because the moment you begin to define it, it seems to slip through your fingers. The moment you attempt to explain to somebody explain to your eHarmony date why you're much funnier than they think you are, you already know you've gone down the wrong path for a lot of different reasons. But part of what we're seeing here is that once we attempt to define something, once we attempt to define what makes something humorous, it immediately seems to go away. This is the dead frog problem. The dead frog problem is that the more you seem to dissect the frog, the faster it seems to die. The same is true with a joke. And as a result of this, it makes it very difficult for us to study it. But let's say even if we could study it, let's say we could study it and we know it has some physical and social benefits. That doesn't do us a world of good if people are just naturally funny and some people are unnaturally funny. If you're just genetically funny, if you are born funny, and we all think that there are certain people that are like that, if you think that some people are born funny, it doesn't do us any good to talk about the benefits that none of us can access. It's the same way with positive psychology, right? It's the same problem we have with positive and happy and optimistic people. They're just annoying. But part of what we're seeing is that part of what our worry is that while we're studying this, if happiness, positivity, and optimism are all based upon genetics, right, then there's no point to studying any of the things we've been talking about so far in this class. The same is true with humor. So if we can't access any of those benefits, that just gives the funny people more to laugh at us about. So I think we can overcome all those barriers today. And I think that there's some extraordinary research that's been coming out in positive psychology and a research specifically on humor that's going to actually allow us to be able to look at this human phenomenon in a way that actually is going to help us in a lot of different ways. So let me tell you that there's actually, in order to study this, just as we did with positive psychology, we're going to have to look at where we looked at the humanistic tradition of psychologists, so too we're going to have to ground ourselves in the philosophies of humor. We're going to have to understand the giants of humor, and we're going to look at two of the theories which I don't find one of them more compelling than the other. What I find really compelling is my explanation, which I'll be giving afterwards. So basically there are three giants in the field of psychological research on humor: Sigmund Freud, Henri Bergson, and me. And so we'll talk first about Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, whose surely unassailable logical assumptions on a whole host of topics will absolutely stand the test of time, wrote a book called Jokes and Their Relationship to the Unconscious. Jokes and Their Relationship to the Unconscious, if you haven't read it, is, for a guy writing a book about humor, this is the most unfunny collection of stories since Leviticus. And in this book, he describes his model of consciousness, where on the inside you have the id, and the id contains the sexual and physical and violent impulses that we all have. I don't have because I went to divinity school, but you all have. Outside of that is the ego, which makes decisions about the id. It's a permeable barrier between the id impulses and the society, and the outside layer is the superego. The superego is the moral constraints or the societal constraints that are placed upon us. So, for example, if my id impulse means that I'm angry at you and want to punch you, my superego and the constraints of society prevent me from doing so. In the same way that if I was wanting to have sex with somebody and my superego said that that was not okay, then the superego, the moral constraints of society, would prevent me from having sex. That's probably the only thing keeping me from having sex. It's my superego. And so one of the things we find is that Freud argues we get frustrated. We get frustrated because those impulses are there, but we have no way of getting those impulses out into the world. And so we become repressed. And the more you become repressed, I think something about imploding at the end. So there's something that's really bad about that. And so what he says is that humor is a socially acceptable envelope for couching those id desires. It's a socially acceptable way of getting those id impulses out into society, which explains why so much of our humor is sexual or aggressive in nature. There's a lot of different examples that we could talk about this, but humor as a psychological safety valve is one of those ways in which explains why you have sexually innuendo jokes on a first date, right, before physicality might be socially acceptable. Which also explains Michael Scott from The Office, That's What She Said jokes, where he says, that's what she said to everything. And while some of them are pretty hard to understand and slippery and hard to grasp, they always left me smiling and satisfied. So this also explains humor that we have towards political figures. A lot of times with political figures, we're not able to, we have no recourse at the sexual or the aggressive level to vent our frustration. So humor is actually one of the ways we can get that out there. The humor itself, using words, is a way that we can allow for our id impulses to come out, because those words don't violate very many of our social constructions. We'll talk about that in a moment, one of the flaws with Freud's theory. But supposedly the words don't actually harm us, so it's socially acceptable. Stephen Colbert says that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me unless you throw a dictionary at me. Write that down. That's important. Write that down. Henri Bergson is the second giant in the field of humor research. Henri Bergson, which I'm definitely saying right with a French accent combined with Texan. I think it's Henri Berg. I think you, with French, you drop everything. And really? That one was funny? All right. Humor as a social corrective. He argues that just like Abraham Maslow, who we studied earlier in the class, is that humans are on a developmental trajectory towards self-actualization or achieving our potential. And what Bergson argues is that humor is the point in which we correct somebody when we slip or fall off this developmental trajectory, when we do something that doesn't allow us to self-actualize as fast as we could. Comedian Louis Black, for example, talks about children who go during the summer to Harry Potter Quidditch camps and ride around on brooms and throw frisbees at each other. And what he says is to gently chide these children. He said, these children might as well start crying about the prom now. What he's doing there is, as we've done something that's maladaptive, like going to a Harry Potter Quidditch camp, or paying $14 for a drink at Ohm, or actively enjoying econometrics or land law theory, or actually ordering food at the Hong Kong lounge and restaurant. In all these situations, we laugh at individuals in order to correct them, to prevent them from falling off this developmental trajectory, so that they can continue on towards self-actualization. If somebody calls, if a girlfriend calls, I was hoping you got the clap. I knew this wasn't on, that's why no one was laughing. So if a girlfriend calls her boyfriend to leave a scandalous drunk dial message and accidentally leaves the drunk dial message on her boyfriend's father's work line, we laugh in order to correct those mistakes. Another story I heard in Kirkland was somebody who, for Halloween, dressed up with making a dress completely out of magazine articles from Cosmo using duct tape, and then went out into the freezing cold, slipped and fell on the ice on her butt, and tore the dress. And I don't even know where to begin with that one, but part of the reason we laugh is that we all fall through the developmental trajectory at some point. And I believe it was Plato that said that magazine dresses will not help us to self-actualize any faster. So we've looked at two different things. We've looked at humor as a corrective, and we've looked at humor as a psychological release. I think one of the people that's absolutely brilliant in the field of research on humor as a social corrective is one of the giants. I think myself, no one said that, is Dale Sturdivant. Dale Sturdivant is somebody you definitely want to write down in your notes. And fortunately, thanks to the magic of YouTube, we're going to get to see Dale Sturdivant's approach to psychology. Tears come to my eyes at this modern-day Marva Collins. So why do we look at these theorists? Why do we study these philosophies? How do they help us? Well, they don't, because they're both wrong. And the reason that they're wrong is they've missed the part about humor that I think is most important and my explanation for it. So, you don't have to write all this down at once. Pretend that it's slowly coming out. So I believe that humor is a mindful lens through which we view the world. And part of the ways that we can see that is that we can see that humor itself is the cognitive lens through which we view actions that come into our environment. We can see this by asking the question of why is it that some people find humor in situations where some people see something that's neutral or sad or tragic, right? Why is it that some people can find things to be funny where other people can't? In the same way that somebody who's optimistic can find something that's good in a situation where somebody who's in the neutral state or a pessimistic state can't see this as well. Now to understand this, part of, this mic's great. Thank you, yes. I also agree it's a brilliant idea. So part of what we're seeing here is we need to, in order to understand this, let's talk a little bit about social rule breaking. I believe that there are unscripted social rules that guide our life all the time that we never really talk about. I taught for social psychology, and for social psychology, one of the things that we did for the class is that we split people up into pairs and made them go out and break social rules. So they would go out during the week and they would go into an elevator at one of the houses and just slowly turn around in the elevator and face the people behind you. Or just lie down in the elevator and see if people said anything, or go to Starbucks and haggle for the price of a coffee, saying that you could get it cheaper if you made it at home, or going to the Coop and attempting the barter system for one of the books, or going to places and asking for a free sample of things you can't get a free sample for, like a Felipe's burrito. Or I know one guy who went into his athletic locker and then went up to everyone who was there and asked them if they would please soap up his back because he was tired. Another girl would only take showers in the girls' locker room where somebody else was already taking a shower, where a shower head was already being used. Another person, I mean, you can do a lot of different things. Like you can go into the bathroom and strike up a conversation through the bathroom stall. This one's great. You should do that here. Say, "Hello, neighbor." Talk amongst yourselves. You know the funniest joke that, wow, I'm really magnified. Can you guys hear me? Wow, this is great. This should happen all the time. I've got a lot of things back here now. Where was I? This is not part of the talk. You guys know what, I can never remember any jokes, but the funniest joke that they did on the website, like they actually found out what the scientific funniest joke was by doing ratings on the website. And the one in America was this guy who was going hunting. I can't tell jokes, but he was, this guy calls into an operator and goes, operator, this is 911. He says, this is why I can't tell jokes. He was in Scranton, Pennsylvania. This is important. It was Tuesday. Anyway, so he calls his operator and says, you know, operator, I think I just shot my friend while we were hunting. I think he's dead. And the operator goes, okay, calm down, sir. Calm down, sir. The very first thing we need you to do is check to make sure that he's dead. So he said, okay, and you hear this quiet, this pause as he puts down the phone, and a few seconds later you hear a gunshot. And he comes back to the phone and he says, okay, he's dead, now what? This was the funniest joke in America. That's surprising. The funniest joke in Europe was not appropriate. There's two ferrets were sitting in a bar, and one ferret says to the other ferret, I slept with your mom last night. And the other ferret doesn't say anything. And the other ferret thinks he doesn't say anything, so he says, I slept with your mom last night. And the second ferret says nothing, and he finally, other ferret, ferret A, said, I slept with your mom last night. And ferret B says, Dad, go home, you're drunk. So the interesting thing about these breaking of the social rules is not just the effect that it had on other people or the awareness that we have social scripts that are surrounding us all the time. It's the awareness of how we act when we're breaking a social rule. Some of the people that were attempting to do this experiment absolutely broke down. They could not go on with the experiment. Other people found humor in the awkwardness, and because of that, they were able to enjoy the experience and actually cause other people more suffering. Part of what we're seeing here is that absolutely it's the mindset that dictates whether or not something is going to be funny. And if it's mindset, it's within our control. And today we're going to talk about some of the ways you can actually control that. But one of the things we talked about earlier in the semester was the Weissman studies and the luck factor. Remember, the luck factor was where he studied and actually created the luck school, in which you could teach people how to feel more lucky, and how you could give people the same exact scenario, and some people would feel lucky or some people would feel unlucky. So for example, if you walk into a bank and you're there with 100 people, actually let's say we're here we're not in Annenberg, we're here in Sanders, and somebody walks in with a gun and fires his weapon one time and it shoots me right in the arm. Do I consider this to be a lucky event or an unlucky event? Well, according to Weissman, that depends upon the counterfactual I use to determine this. If I compare it to every other time that I've been here in the theater, that seems to be a pretty unlucky event, right? And it seems to be pretty unfortunate. I mean, there's a lot of other people in the room that this person could shoot. I went to the divinity school. I'm sure I'm better than at least one of the other people in here and deserve this less. So why was I the one that got shot? On the other hand, the counterfact that I could use to compare to see if this is actually a lucky or an unlucky event, that counterfact could be, well, he could have shot me in the head. Now, I know, and I love that the optimistic and lucky viewpoint is always choosing the thing that causes the most carnage and blood, right? Well, I could have gotten shot in the head and the heart and died up on stage bleeding to death. That would be, I'm definitely killing the mood. This is just like every date. So it usually happens about 20 minutes in. Based upon the way that I actually decide to counter a fact to that determines whether or not I find something to be funny. In the same way, humor is the same way. Look at how much the context matters. If I said something that's fact, that's innocuous, like I cut my toenails, that's not really funny. But if I said I cut my toenails in class, suddenly that seems to be like a little bit more funny. Not ha-ha funny, but a little bit funnier. Or alcohol makes you drunk is an innocuous fact. Alcohol makes you drunk before giving a lecture on humor is a little bit funnier. So part of what we're seeing here is that the way that you view the environment, the way that you parse the world actually has a direct effect upon whether or not you find something to be funny in the first place. This is something we called in my sections the alpha press and the beta press. The alpha press is the objective constraints of reality. We're all experiencing the same alpha press. We're all sitting in the same room with the same lights, but our beta press, our subjective construal of reality, is different. Every person in here is experiencing something different. They're experiencing, you're either like bored or tired or hungry right now, or excited or happy. I'm up here nervous. And part of what you're seeing is that their way of viewing the world absolutely has an effect upon how you view that alpha press. Now, the things we've been talking about in positive psychology so far have been talking about the ways in which our beta press is actually malleable, that we can change our beta press and as a result have extreme amounts of changes in our adaptive behavior. I think that humor is one of the most powerful ways that we can actually change the beta press by changing the way that we actually view an environment so that it's actually adaptive for us. There's something that they found at Harvard Medical School called the Tetris effect. The Tetris effect is, how many people have played Tetris? A lot. Woo. Yes. Woo. To Tetris. Tetris is Tetris, if you haven't played it, is a game in which shapes of different sizes fall from the ceiling, as they do in real life, and you rotate them around, and you try and make straight lines across. And if you make a straight line all the way across, the line disappears, and you're trying to keep the shapes from going all the way up to the top. What they found when they were actually testing video games on college students at the medical school, and they found that after students played about 4 or 5 hours of Tetris straight and got paid for it, which is a pretty good deal, then afterwards they went back to their rooms or went on with their lives for the most part, and there were subjective reports that some of these individuals would then go into a supermarket and start rearranging the bread on the shelf so they made straight lines. Or they'd be looking at traffic and say, oh, an L-shaped car here would complete that line and make friends that way. Or they would, or this one guy was actually looking at a Sports Illustrated swimsuit calendar issue, and it was when they had all the like a lot of the models all together at once, and his comment was, I wish I had a Z-shaped woman who would fit and make that line all the way across. Clearly what he was doing was parsing the entire world, even a swimsuit calendar, into whether or not he could change shapes in order to make straight lines. Every input his brain was receiving, and our brains receive too much input all the time, was being parsed through this one code. Now what we find is that this is something that I call a cognitive afterimage. A cognitive afterimage is just, if you stare at the sun for a really long time, you're stupid. And what happens is, you momentarily burn your retina, and you can see this little blue or green dot in your vision that goes around. It happens when a lot of flash photography goes off when I'm in Kirkland House. There's a lot of times when this can occur, and so what that is an afterimage that's on your retina. Well, the same thing happens at the cognitive level as well. Our brains can actually retain an afterimage, and in the Tetris effect, what was happening is the cognitive afterimage that people were getting stuck with was viewing the world through the lens of parsing the world into ways they can rotate shapes to make straight lines. So too, the individuals who are doing humor, the people that can look at something like the writers for Jon Stewart or the writers for the Stephen Colbert Report, when they look at the newspaper, when they see something that seems to be neutral or even sad or tragic, they start to change the shape. They rotate the shape in their mind. And as a result, they're looking for patterns all the time. They're looking for multiple potentials within a static status quo. Instead of just seeing a newspaper, they see the possibility of humor that can come out of that. And as you can find, and you can find that this could be a detriment sometimes as well, you can get stuck in the pattern of looking for things that are humorous, which could be adaptive, or if you're in a fight and all you can do is keep making jokes, can be very maladaptive. So one last thing about humor as a transformative lens before we talk about the benefits of humor is that when we laugh at something, Peter Berger argues that we get a momentary suspension of reality. That when we can see something that's an alternative to reality, it teaches us that the status quo, the reality that we see in front of us, is both malleable and is not the only possible reality. That the status quo absolutely can be changed. So humor provides a way of being actually more mindful. Ellen Langer defines mindfulness as being present in a situation so that you can be aware of the potentials in that environment. The definition I gave for humor is almost word for word what you see with mindfulness. The reason is that I think that when you're really present in a situation and when you view the world through a specific pattern, what you're doing is you're actually parsing the world in a way that actually shows more potentials in that environment. So Maslow argues that we have these peak experiences where for momentarily we put on the cloak of self-actualization. When we put on this cloak of self-actualization, we momentarily gain and see and glimpse the potentials we actually have. So too, I think that humor is in the same vein. I think we momentarily take on self-actualization, because we're provided with a reality in which the consequences of our actions don't have a negative effect upon us, where we see life-giving reality and happiness even in a situation that might seem dry or static to other people. The ordinary becomes extraordinary, which is one of the traits of peak experiences that Abraham Maslow did. I think The Office is a great example of this. I have 2 one-minute clips from The Office that I want to show you of where they've taken something that's just, you're in an office doing something that's ordinary, and take the ordinary and make it extraordinary. If you haven't, how many people will watch The Office? How many people have not watched The Office? Wow. How many people are not funny? Some of you are not raising your hands, and I know that's not true. Okay, so good. How many people in here think that they're have an above average sense of humor? Raise your hand. How many people think that they have a below average sense of humor? By the way, this would be the rest of you. I don't know what other option you're waiting for. How many people think you're exactly average? The funny people. All right. So let's watch these 2 clips, and we'll watch how the ordinary becomes extraordinary. There's one more.
So Dwight, in your own words, someone replaced all my pens and pencils with crayons. I suspect Jim Halpert. Everyone has called me Dwayne all day. I think Jim Halpert paid them to.
Yes, $5 each, and it was totally worth it.
At the end of the day, my desk was about 2 feet closer to the copier.
Yeah, I moved it an inch every time I went to the bathroom. And that's how I spent my entire day that day.
Every time I typed my name, it said diaper.
Just a simple macro.
This morning, I knocked myself in the head with the phone.
That actually took a while. I had to put more and more nickels into his handset until he got used to the weight, and then I just took them all out.
So just as Jim performed some experiments on Dwight, so too these experiments are going to reveal how much humor actually has a positive effect upon us, not only when we're watching The Office, but when we ourselves choose to surround ourselves with people that are funny or decide to be funny ourselves. In order to understand this, there are 2 parts of the human body. Write that down. Only 2 parts. The sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, P-A-R-A. The parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the part of the body that's responsible for dropping chemicals into your body that prepare you for fight or flight. It momentarily makes you superhuman. You're stronger, you're faster, you have more endurance, you have more energy. Now the problem with being superhuman all the time, and I should know, is that it's catabolic. Is that when you dump these neurochemicals into your body, while your body becomes stronger momentarily, it actually is tearing down every single organ in your body. Stress has this effect where it actually wears out every tissue, living tissue in your body. Now that's not the end of the story, fortunately, because we don't just get more and more excited, our heart rate keeps increasing until we just explode, because we have this other part of our central nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for calming the body down, for slowing our breath rate, for slowing our heart rate. It's the part that actually causes rejuvenation. And while we don't feel the spike in our energy levels, we have a longer sustained period of energy because we're constantly revitalizing, repairing, and creating more energy in and of itself. Helpful drawing. So what this is called is something called the soprano effect. I call it the soprano effect. No one else calls that. But we'll test on it anyway. So the soprano effect is the chronic activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And this is what a lot of Harvard students, including myself, do, is that when we're about to go prepare for a test or we're dealing with anything in our lives, I hear so many people before a test say, I'm totally going to fail this test. I'm not ready for this test at all. I'm totally going to fail this test. Or they say to themselves, oh, I'm so busy, I'm so stressed. And when they do that, what they're doing is we're leaving everything to the last minute, like Paul was talking about with procrastination. The resulting effect is that you get that momentary burst of energy because your sympathetic nervous system is activating. So we get used to that. We get addicted to using that sympathetic nervous system for that boost, and we think that energy is what's actually going to allow us to accomplish things. Tony Soprano is not in reality, but on the HBO series, is a mob boss. And part of the point of the series is that he had to go to therapy, which is not necessarily something you want to do as a nefarious crime boss. And he had to go into therapy because he was having panic attacks. His body was shutting down because he was responding to the fact that he was constantly activating his sympathetic nervous system, whether it be his nefarious actions as a crime lord boss, and a couple other adjectives, or living with his family, trying to live a normal life, living in New Jersey, which living in New Jersey would be even more stressful. And as a result of this, his body was just shutting down. And so part of what was happening, he was chronically activating his sympathetic nervous system. So the same thing happens with Harvard students, is that oftentimes we will decide to use that activation, that chronic activation of our nervous system, and as a result, we wear down our bodies, and our bodies actually begin to shut down. Fortunately, that's not the end of the story. The greatest buffer against the soprano effect is humor. And the reason is that humor, just like mindfulness and meditation, activates the parasympathetic nervous system. And as a result of that, several extraordinary things happen. It's amazing that laughter is something we consider to be just a luxury, something that we do just in our free time if we have nothing else to do, has such a dramatic effect upon our lives. First of all, laughter itself is both medicine and exercise. If you like Jack Handey and Deep Thoughts from Saturday Night Live, there was some quote about, it was something like, my father always said that laughter was the best medicine. That's probably why several of us died of tuberculosis, which isn't all that funny, but I decided to go for it anyway. And so it's also a form of exercise. That every time you laugh, and if you've chosen to laugh at some point during this lecture, or if you're planning on laughing after the lecture, what happens is your body is actually doing a lot of exercise. I already told you how many muscles you're actually contracting in your body. Well, it turns out just 10 to 15 minutes of laughing actually is enough to burn the amount of calories in a medium-sized block of chocolate, which is pretty good. Also, some people report that just 1 minute of laughing is enough to get their heart rate up more than 15 minutes of a rowing machine exercise. It depends on whether or not you're actually rowing it at the time. They also find that it causes, this is amazing that humor would do something like this at the chemical level, that it's actually increasing our T cells in our body, which actually strengthens our immune system, increasing our gamma interferon, which is the disease-fighting proton, as well as increasing our B cells, which are responsible for creating antibodies to actually prepare our body to defend against disease. The humor is actually making us better defended against reality, right? It's actually preparing our body to defend itself against the outside world. It's partly the way that it does this, and part of the reason that it affects the soprano effect is that researchers like Sultanov found that laughter actually decreases the amount of serum cortisol that occurs in our body. Cortisol is released when we have a stress response. That stress response, if I cause you to be stressed for whatever reason, and your cortisol levels begin to go up, if you cause somebody to laugh midway during that experience, their cortisol levels will actually decrease again. That if they're going through a stressful event, laughing in the midst of going through that event will actually allow them to not have all the negative effects of stress, which, remember, tear down every organ in your body. In addition, there's a ton of mental and physical benefits that accrue because of this. First of all, they find that even small doses of humor actually increase our immune system. So what they did is they brought in people who had bronchial asthma, and they exposed them to a dust mite, which they're highly allergic to, just to make sure that they actually had this response. Pretty sure that these are the same people that did the ipecac and pregnancy studies that we talked about earlier on in the course, or the learned helplessness ones where they kept shocking the dogs over and over again. So in this case, for the bronchial asthma, they exposed them to this dust mite, which potentially fatal, and then they had them go away for a little bit, but they wanted to make sure that everyone had an effect based upon this dust mite. Then they had the people come back to the experiment, which shows how smart people are. And these people with the bronchial asthma came back to the same experiment, and half of them, before they were exposed to the dust mite again, were just told a joke. I don't know what joke they were told, but it had to have been, they had to actually laugh at it. And then the other group was a neutral group, one that they just had watched a neutral or listened to a neutral story. Now that shouldn't have any effect upon the way a dust mite affects somebody with bronchial asthma. But what they found is the people that had been told a single joke to beforehand showed statistically significantly smaller amounts of flare-up in terms of their asthma. I can't imagine, I was trying to think of funny jokes that you could tell people, and I couldn't come up with anything. You probably will think of something better after this, but I was thinking like, well, no, actually, I'm not going to go for that. Never mind, it wasn't funny. I was going to do a knock-knock joke with bronchial asthma, but it's not funny. We also find that humor also increases pain tolerance. So there's a group of German researchers, of course it would be German researchers, who found and put individuals, the participants who signed up for the study, put their hands in ice-cold ice water. Now this is a standard way in psychology and medical experiments of testing somebody's pain tolerance, because there's usually no lasting effects upon the individual except for debilitating frostbite. And so what they find is that they keep your hand in this frozen bucket of ice water, and during this period, so the longer you keep it in, the better your pain tolerance. Try it with your friends. It's a great party trick. And one of the things you can do is you can have one person watch a funny video, one person watch a neutral video, and one person watch a sad video while they're doing this. And what they found is the group that was watching the humorous video could keep their hand in the ice bucket for statistically significantly longer than the other groups of people. Which means if you find humor funny, you're probably not as smart as other people, and you can keep your hand in ice buckets for longer periods of time. But this is amazing. This is amazing. It wasn't just during the experiment that they found this effect. They even decided to test the people 20 minutes after they were exposed to humor. 20 minutes after they were exposed to humor, the same effect occurred. That there was a 20-minute after effect of watching something that was humorous in terms of your pain tolerance. Now this has a lot to do and a lot of implications thus for people that are experiencing chronic fatigue or chronic pain in their own lives due to diseases, and the way in which humor itself could play a role in that. They also found that after you eat a large meal, that if you had type 2 diabetes and you ate a large meal, that if you were watching something that was humorous afterwards as opposed to something that was neutral, surprisingly your blood sugar actually was much lower than the group that had eaten the same exact meal, which is amazing that that was occurring. And finally, they found decreases of stress and increased remission rates in terms of cancer. For example, one of the studies was on testicular cancer, and they found that these individuals, once they could find a way of laughing and coping, using laughter as a coping mechanism, that individuals that found laughter as a coping mechanism versus those that did not, showed increased levels of remission, and the fact that the symptoms that they were experiencing actually decreased, and they had higher levels of pain tolerance, and decreased stress because of the affliction that they were feeling. Now, as a result of this, we've seen some pretty remarkable things about humor. I mean, we've seen the ways in which it changes our body chemistry, it changes the way our immune system actually fights and defends against these things, it changes our stress levels, it changes the way that our body responds to dust mites and to food and to testicular cancer. There's a lot of different ways that humor actually has an effect upon us, which is remarkable. But I also want to talk about the social effects of humor as well. Now, if you were here on the very first day of class, I've told you these statistics, but I just want to remind you about these statistics that last year when we tested the Harvard students, we found that the average number of romantic relationships at Harvard was less than 1, and the average number of sexual partners was between 0 and 0.5, the scientific equivalent of second base. And we also found that 24% of you are currently unaware if you're involved in a romantic relationship. Now, I just remind you about this because I think that this is one of the areas in which humor could actually do us a lot of good at Harvard. So I taught for human sexuality at Harvard as well, it's an awkward class. How many people took human sexuality? Just one. Hello. This is awkward. So one of the things, the reason why it was so awkward is the very first paper that the students had to write was a 10-page paper on their first sexual encounter, which I then had to grade. That's really awkward, and I'd have to make comments like, no, there's no way that happened, or This paper took a lot longer to write than you've ever had sex. There was a lot of awkwardness that caused it. But one of the things that was most awkward about this is that they, for one of the sections, they wanted us to show condoms to the Harvard students because, well, of the statistics you just showed. The chances are you haven't seen a condom or anything that rhymes with sex. And so what they found is that they wanted us to give these condoms out in sections so everyone could see one. And so I was teaching 4 sections for this class, so I stuffed 80 condoms into the front pouch of my backpack. And I was sitting at Starbucks, which is my coffee, and I spent all day there, rented out for $1.39 a day. And I find that while I was sitting there, I don't know why I keep saying I find, while I was sitting there, there was this girl sitting next to me. And at one point she turned to me and she said, do you have a pen I could borrow? And I said, oh, absolutely, I can definitely get you a pen. And I'm totally forgetting. And I opened up my backpack and 80 condoms exploded. All over her, all over her table, all over the floor underneath her. It took me like 4 minutes to pick up all the condoms underneath her. I offered her one. She didn't want that or my pen. But research that's done on first encounters like this has been pretty remarkable. Fraley did some research where if you bring people into, oh, I forgot something. We'll come back. Fraley found that if you bring people into a room, participants, and they're strangers, and you have them do a cooperative task, well, one of the TFs loved attraction and bondage. Is one of my titles. I just think that's funny. So I've totally lost my train of thought. I'll talk about mirror neurons instead. Mirror neurons are awesome, because I skipped these a minute ago. Mirror neurons we didn't even know we had in the human brain until about 10 years ago, or actually about even less than that. And we're only starting to begin to become aware of them. But it's the part that if somebody smiles at you, you almost have to smile back at them. And the reason is because there's part of your brain that's lighting up as if you were smiling as well. Just as if I was standing on stage and somebody came over and tackled me really hard and everyone goes, ooh, you know, like feeling that, your brain is lighting up, those mirror neurons are lighting up as if you just got tackled as well, which is the reason why people groan at football games, even if they're 2,000 miles away from the actual stadium. We're actually literally hardwired for empathy for other people. As a result of that, humor is extremely contagious because these mirror neurons begin to activate when we see other people laughing. Now, the reason why this is helpful is because of the attraction that it causes in these first situations. So what we find is if you bring in strangers, have them play a competitive game. Afterwards, you have them rank the attractiveness and how closely they felt bonded to the persons they're working with. And usually the levels of attraction and bondage were pretty low. For the middle group, you have somebody come in and you have them do a cooperative task. This is similar to the Wall Street and community game studies that Tal was talking about earlier on in the semester. In this experiment, when you have a cooperative task, people's attractiveness, ratings of attraction and bondage for both of the individuals go up. But if you have the individuals do an extremely awkward task together, like play Twister, or you have somebody come into the room that's an experimenter and accidentally pour water on one of the participants, telling them that they're awkward and then leaving the room, allowing them to laugh about it. Those individuals, because there's something humorous that's going on, show the highest levels of rating the other person as being attractive and show the highest levels of bondage. Now, what this means is the next time you're standing at a bar, you shouldn't attempt to do some sort of a competitive or a cooperative task with that individual. You should either suggest to play Twister or pour your drink on them and tell them how awkward they are. That witty repartee is definitely going to increase your bondage. So what they find is dating is an interesting case when it comes to humor, especially in terms of the social elements. So we know that there are certain things that people are attracted to in the physical domain, but there should be no evolutionary advantage at all, right, to why somebody would pick somebody who is humorous, right? Yet, how many people in the room would not date somebody if they didn't make enough money? Just raise your hand. Okay, good, a couple honest people. Evolutionarily, that's the correct answer, but very few. Now raise your hand if you would not date somebody because you found out they have no sense of humor at all. almost everyone. Maybe that's just a more socially acceptable answer to do, and that might skew the study itself. But the fact is, I think a lot of us are being honest that we really want a sense of humor to be part of our mates. Good. You know that's just going to happen now over and over again. So what we find with these individuals is that if you are, faced with a threat in the wild, like a lion, you want to be able to fight or flee. You don't want to tell it a knock-knock joke, right? That doesn't increase your selective adaptivity or natural selection, right? But what we find is that people seem to absolutely favor this. And there's some differences in terms of the genders, but part of what scientists and psychologists believe is that humor is a signal of cognitive fitness. That just like we want physical fitness in somebody else, so too we want cognitive fitness. And when somebody's humorous and can view the world from different lenses, it actually has a dramatic effect upon not only the way that they can deal with reality, but the way that they can help you deal with reality. All those benefits we just talked about in terms of the physical benefits of humor are all garnered by people that are surrounded by people that are laughing or that are making the jokes themselves. So if you're around somebody that's funny, you get all those positive benefits as well. In addition, they found a couple interesting differences, the differences between men and women by a guy named, or a woman named Bressler, I'm not sure which one. The differences between men and women by Bressler is they found that there's difference in terms of what people are actually looking for, and they checked people flirting at a bar. And so the experiment was they would watch people while they're flirting at a bar. This is just creepy. And what they would do is they would make tick marks every time the female or the male would laugh. And then afterwards, they would go up and give these two strangers a report, asking them to fill out a report on this exchange before they go off somewhere else. And so what they found is that the number of laughs by the female correlated with how much the female liked the male in that exchange. They also found out that the number of laughs by the female correlated with how much the male liked her. What they found is that the male's laughter had absolutely no effect whatsoever upon the attractiveness of either people. So it seems like, and this would be, this is an aggregate, but not necessarily a case for everyone. Part of what you're seeing is trends in which some people seem to be the joke generators and some people seem to be the joke receivers. And I think that it's interesting to think about where you lie in that match in terms of which one you're actually attempting to do with your own humor style. We also find that it's extremely important in terms of negotiations and marriage, which are usually just basically the same thing. John Gottman found that, remember John Gottman is the guy, the relationship expert who did the 4 Horsemen. We talked about this earlier in the relationship section. He says that the greatest way to diffuse a conflict that's occurring in a negotiation or in a marriage problem, the greatest solution is to find a way to use humor as a coping mechanism, to insert that humor in where you're feeling the stress response or the release of cortisol that they were talking about. Even John Gottman views the humor as one of the most important ways of affecting this. This is just interesting, but not related to what I'm talking about. This is what a brain looks like with the part of the brain activated most when a college male student is thinking about love. It's beautiful. The rest of it lights up when you ask them to think about sex. Humor is therapy. I'm just going to talk about this really quickly because I want to get on to the most powerful part of humor. Pennybaker studies, which we talked about earlier about journaling, said that as you start to journal, you see a spike in your neural activity levels, where you actually feel more stress when you're journaling, but then afterwards dip down to a lower rest state. The same is true with humor. Humor, because it crosses the line, also increases our stress momentarily, but allows us to return back down to a state that's below in a lower rest state, because it's activated our parasympathetic nervous system. As a result of that, humor can be in a very effective way for us to use to deal with therapeutic situations. Some of the ways that people do it are laughing groups in India, where they have people get in a circle and they'll put their heads on each other's stomachs, and one person will go ha, another person will go ha ha, and they'll do this all around in a circle until everyone's laughing spontaneously, and it's a great workout, and at the end of it you actually feel like your well-being is so much higher at the end. They also have something called cuddle parties at Cuddle Bunnies. That's from the ladder theory online, if you want to Google that. Cuddle parties is something that's in New York that I don't have time to talk about. And transforming trauma and bad days. I think this is one of the really interesting parts of it, too, is that humor actually allows us to be able to transform things that we thought were negative or bad or upsetting in the past. And I want to talk about that as the greatest power of humor. But before we do that, I want to say 6 ways you can actually increase your humor level as well. First of all, we just talked about one of these, but journaling stories that are unique to you. Finding funny stories that just as you have to go through your day and when you journal, try to write about positive experiences, you're scanning your environment for the events that occurred during your day which are positive. So too, you can do that with humor and train that as a skill. Just as gratitude, you can train as a skill, or optimism. So what you do is you go throughout your day, write down something that happened during your day, then play around with it. Change the shape of it, keep reorienting it until you can find something that's humorous about it, just as Jon Stewart's writers do when they're looking at the news. As a result of that, your brain actually gets in the pattern of looking for things that are funnier in your life. Second is watch funny people. When you observe other people that are funny, because of these mirror neurons, you actually pick up the rhythm of humor from them. That there's actually a rhythm that you can actually study online if you're interested about this, a rhythm of humor that you can study, and that's the reason why patterns and breaking of patterns is so important. But you consciously or unconsciously pick those up, just as the visualization practices we were talking about, where if you watch somebody on television who's bad at a sport, if you watch them, you actually become bad at that technique as well. So too, if you watch somebody who's good at a sport, you become better at the action that they're watching. The same occurs when you're watching humor. Also is the TQP, the 2-question process. Why am I so funny and why don't other people recognize this? Keep repeating this to yourself. It absolutely builds your self-esteem. In addition, the permission to be subhuman. Part of what we're seeing, and Bergson talks about, is that in order to make these jokes and laugh at things that are traumatic, we have to have a momentary anesthesia of the heart. The momentary anesthesia of the heart. And if we don't allow ourselves to be subhuman for a moment, we don't allow ourselves to be human and the fact to recognize that we have these id impulses. Variety and breaking the patterns. The more you can break a pattern, the more you're able to see potentialities within a situation. There's a study with mice where they have, if you have one mouse in the cage, it'll have sex with a female mouse that you put in the cage like 2 or 3 times, and then it gets really tired and then goes off into a corner and doesn't even want to cuddle. And it does this for about 10 minutes. And this is called a latency period, where biologically you can't have sex for a while because it's too tired. Unless, of course, you introduce a new female into the cage. At this point, the mouse goes over and continues the experiment again, regardless of the amount of latency period that's there. What this seems to indicate is our brains, our mammalian brains, are actually hardwired for variety. And that's not an appropriate approach to relationships, but that's one in which we recognize that variety is absolutely the spice of life. And the more that you can change up the patterns you're doing, the more you'll see potentials in your environment, and the Tetris effect, which we already talked about. So now for the greatest power of humor, which I think is really important. And I want to talk a little bit and show a little clip, since we just have 6 minutes left. I wanted to show you a clip that I found to be extremely powerful. And I don't think it's a buzzkill after having a humor lecture, but I think that it's really important to see how Jon Stewart dealt with the September 11th tragedy afterwards. And I think from just a psychological perspective, it's not funny, but watch what's happening to him. Watch his facial expressions as he's attempting this almost heroic attempt to bring humor back into the situation. And listen how he describes humor. We'll watch this for 3 minutes. We'll watch 1 minute of a Family Guy clip, and then I'll conclude with 1 minute. Wait for it.
Good evening, and welcome to the Daily Show. We are back. This is our first show since the tragedy in New York City, and there's no other way really to start the show than to ask you at home the question that we asked the audience here tonight, and that we've asked everybody that we know here in New York since September 11th, and that is, are you okay? And we pray that you are and that your family is. I'm sorry to do this to you. It's another entertainment show beginning with an overwrought speech of a shaken host, and television is nothing if not redundant. So I apologize for that. It's something that unfortunately we do for ourselves so that we can drain whatever abscess is in our hearts and move on to the business of making you laugh, which we haven't been able to do very effectively lately. Everyone's checked in already. I know we're late. I'm sure we're getting in right under the wire before the cast of Survivor offers their insight into what to do in these situations. They said to get back to work, and there were no jobs available for a man in the fetal position under his desk crying, which I gladly would have taken. So I come back here, and tonight's show is not obviously a regular show. We looked through the vault, we found some clips that we thought might make you smile, which is really what's necessary, I think, right about now. And a lot of folks have asked me, what are you going to do when you get back? What are you going to say? I mean, geez, what a terrible thing to have to do, and I don't see it as a burden at all. I see it as a privilege, and I see it as a privilege, and everyone here does.
So am I back on? I think it's such a powerful clip, and you can hear him dealing with the suffering that he's experiencing, and you can see him trying to jumpstart the humor and then recoiling back again. You can hear him talking about those id impulses that he needs to release, and he later goes on and talks about the frustration. At the end of the show, he actually just brings out a puppy on the stage and just allows the puppy to be there to try and get us to just return to this point where we can see potentials beyond the tragedy that was actually faced upon them. But I think that it's just a remarkable scene to watch. But afterwards, you could see the people afterwards were dealing with the tragedy in different ways. And I think one of the things that was really interesting from a sociological perspective was Family Guy's response to this, where they were going through this period where we're absolutely terrified of people making terrorist threats against the United States. And they showed this. So he said he had a note from his doctor. I'm going to cut it off there because it gets worse. I just have 1 minute left, so I just want to tell you this. That I think that the things that we've been talking about today, and I think that that is a remarkable scene in which you see us moving from something that we were terrified of to something that we could begin to laugh at because we could see the humanity there. We could see ourselves laughing and making mistakes while giving a videotaped conference, not necessarily on the same topics that he was doing. But the things we talk about today is that humor is like optimism. It's a lens through which we view the world, that it demands mindfulness to potentials that increases our health, our social benefits, and our physical benefits, and it can serve as a therapeutic process. I think that humor itself we perceive to be a luxury, but I think in times of suffering and conflict and tragedy and recession and depression, I think that there's nothing more important than humor, and it's just an honor, like Jon Stewart said, to be with you here today. Thank you. Thank you.